I also welcome all colleagues who are following us online. Some housekeeping rules. Today we will start talking about data infrastructures and data spaces. Next slide, please. And I'd like, okay. And I'd like to remind that this session will be recorded and the records will be accessible at the e-IRG webpage. Please do not activate your microphone and video unless the host gives you permission. Then when you take the floor, please just talk loud and slowly. It's important for all the colleagues who are following us online to be to help them to listen in a clear way what we are doing here in the room. In the room, we are at the moment around 25 persons, just for your information. Use the chat for questions. The question will be then brought forward to the moderator. This will give us the opportunity to understand how we can address the main issues that were raised by the presenters. Please make use of the survey for feedback on agenda page, and you can comment on Twitter and send feedback to the e-IRG Secretariat. The E-Infrastructure Reflection Group, just as a reminder, is a member state body which was founded 19 years ago. The vision of the e-IRG is to facilitate integration in the area of European infrastructures and connected services within and between member states at the European level and then globally. The mission is to support a coherent, innovative and strategic European infrastructure policy making and to foster the development of convergent and sustainable infrastructure services. I'd like to remind that we produced some publications, some papers, some white papers, fostering well, the ideas of our mission. And with the E-Infrastructure Commons paper, which was published in 2012, we believe to have paved the way to the then founded European Open Science Cloud, which happened 6 years after that. We stressed the need for infrastructure coordination at the national level and the creation of strong national building blocks. This was then stated in our roadmap 2016, and with the paper concerning the role of the national nodes, which was then published 2019, we continued to believe on the creation of the infrastructure commons and the instantiation at the European level. Today, we are, or at the present time, we are working on a white paper. The first part was presented last year. And the second part will be presented by the end of this year and will be published at the beginning of next year. Next slide. I'd like to thank the program committee, which worked very hard during summertime. The program committee was composed by the chair, Jan Gruntorad from Czech Republic, and then the members, Volker Beckmann, Panos Agirakis, Stefan Hanslik, Marko Bonac, and the support, the valid support of our support project, Jan Vibelitz, Fotik Karayanis, Michael Maragakis, and Bernd Sauruger. Yesterday, we had the first session on coordination and collaboration among European infrastructures. Then we tackled issues related to the energy crisis and e-infrastructures. And today, we will now start with data infrastructures and data spaces. I am pleased to welcome and to greet my colleague, Chris Delouf, from Belnet, or from Belgium, and from how should I say, Chris?
A lot of hats.
And I'd like to give you the floor.
Okay, thank you, Paolo. I have a presentation. Okay, let's begin. So my name is Chris de Loof. As Paulus said, I'm working for the Belgian government, for Belgian Science Policy Office, also for Belnet, where I do some advising and policy advising then for the government. It's concerning e-infrastructures. So we have an important topic now, the data infrastructures and the data spaces. It's like a hype, right? So it's rather new for us, but I think the e-IRG and a lot of other players and other stakeholders can play an important role in it. And I think it's interesting to be part of this endeavor of the European Commission. And also, it's not only an endeavor of the European Commission, but it already exists for some times because data spaces are not really new, but it was already picked up by the commercial world. But now there is more and more money also and another policy concerning the data spaces from the European Commission. So this is not, I will say, an elaborated course on data spaces. So the only thing that I will do is in the 10 minutes that I have and the introduction of the speakers is to let you familiarize with some of the concepts of the data spaces, how they are conceived by the European Commission. So everything began with the European data strategy, and it was adopted in February 2020. And the purpose was to make a single European market for data. So it's not about policy, that's an important document, but the Commission already said that, okay, if we want to make a data space, everybody has to be informed also within the European Commission, what is a data space? And so they wrote a staff working document, which was published in February 2022, and has a lot of, I will say, concepts that are already explained in that document. So a data space is not coming just from the cloud, I will say. It's also linked with a lot of legislative framework. So there was the Data Governance Act, there is the Data Act, and there is also the Open Data Directive. So most of the speakers that will come, they will shed a bit light on one of those topics. So we will have some speakers that will explain some topics on the legislative framework. We will have some speakers that will discuss the thematic data spaces, and also we will have one speaker dealing with the open side, the open data directive. So about that legislative framework, you see there is a lot of legislation that already has been, I will say, launched. So now we are speaking about the Data Governance Act. I think Federico Milani from the European Commission will go deeper in that act. We will also speak about the Data Act. Data Act is not yet published, but is also a very important act. All the others, they are already somewhere in place, but not necessarily applicable. But everybody knows about the GDPR. And what is also important to mention is the vertical legislation. Some of the data spaces will need some specific legislation and think about the automotive, but also about the health data space. So these are the data spaces. There are a lot of data spaces. They are all launched somewhere already as a kind of prototype, and the next framework, not framework program, but in work program 23-24, they will go into the direction of the deployment. What you see on this data space are, of course, the clouds. You see also somewhere the open science clouds, but what you also see is the data space support center, and moreover, there is also a technical infrastructure. And that's the reason why we are here. So the design principles for the common European data spaces, I will not go into detail, but as I said, the legal framework is very important. It's also about openness, so that there is a link with open science. We need as much stakeholders as possible to contribute to be a user also of the data spaces. What you are seeing is the interconnection and interoperability. Interoperability will be a major endeavor together with the governments, and also some of the things that are going on also in the technical data infrastructure. You maybe have heard about the simple framework, the cloud to edge middleware framework. That's one of the things that has to be put in place in the technical data infrastructure. So as you've seen, the work program 23-24 from the digital program, you see that there are a lot of data spaces going into deployment. And if you have a focus on the fifth one, you will see the language data space, including e-translation. And I think one of our speakers will also go deeper into this topic. Then what I was also mentioning was the Data Space Support Center. They are not here for the moment because they are just kicking off, but they will do a lot of coordination work and also make some toolkits and blueprints and will talk also with all the stakeholders, included also the European Commission. That is a project. The project kicked off in, I think, September, October, and now is coming up to speed. Then the last thing that's maybe interesting to mention is that there are a lot of instruments conceived by the European Commission. One of those instruments is, of course, the funding, but another instrument is also a legal person, and that's called the EDIC. The EDIC will be one of the legal persons that we can use for creating or governing a data space. I don't know if this topic will come into scope now for this within with the speakers, but of course, just remember that the EDIC is one of the legal instruments to create a data space. So I think this is the crash course data spaces in 10 minutes. That's not everything is said. So we have a lot of people that will go deeper into the topic. And one of the first speakers that I can announce is Federico Milani. He will speak about the Data Act and the Data Governance Act and the legal framework. Federico Milani is the Deputy Head of Unit of Data Policies and the Innovation at DG Connect. And this unit supports the data economy and the digital single market through policy initiatives. So I don't know if, Federico, do you hear me? He's not here. So it's a second. So Volker can be the first presentation. Okay, sorry, we will change a bit the presentations, I think, because I still have another one. Okay, so Volker, I see that you are ready. Volker will speak. I think it will be a mix. It will be about the health data space. Health data space is a thematic data space, but that it's not only an infrastructure for data space, but it's also a big part is also legislation. So there will be an act regulation that will be applicable for the health data space. And I guess France has an important role to play in that one. And I think Volker will speak about it. So Volker, he's the program manager for the EOSC in the French Ministry for Higher Education, Research and Innovation. He's also one of the members of the e-IRG for France, and he's the co-chair of the EOSC steering board. So Volker, do you hear me?
Yes, thanks, Chris, for the introduction. Do you see my slides?
Yeah, okay.
Can you see my slides?
Yeah, okay, the slides we see you.
Okay, very good. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. So I want to go a bit into European health data space as one of the examples for the data spaces and what we observe as risks and opportunities connected to that. So you mentioned this already. There are this data spaces which are foreseen to boost the development necessary in certain domains. So this is part of Europe's strategy for data. It's strongly connected to the Data Governance Act and the Data Act. And you see here the list of data spaces foreseen. This is perhaps not a complete list. Most of all, of course, the EOSC is missing as a transverse data space. So you see here health, industrial and manufacturing, agriculture, and so on. So Europe decided to start with the regulations for the health data space. Not in every case there will be regulations necessary, and not in every case we are so much affected by this as research communities. But you can see already that there are certain other topics which are going to be important, like skills, for example, where we have a lot to say, where we have also a lot to contribute. So we see the European health data space also as a prototype. And if we get the things right, if we connect correctly to it now as research communities, as ministries, then I think we have a good chance to shape the landscape then for the coming years. So I think that this is an important message for you as key actors to try to influence the data spaces so that they are useful for your communities, that they represent the interests at national level, for example. So the European health data space, you mentioned this already, Chris, it has two main parts. It has a primary use of data. That's the general objective of the European health data space, to ensure European individuals to have increased control over their health data. So that's a topic which is not so close to us as researchers, but it has a lot of impact on the secondary use of data, because the secondary main goal of the European health data space is to provide a consistent, trustworthy, and efficient setup for the use of health data for research, innovation, policymaking, and regulatory activities. So in this context, there are some parts which are indeed very important for us as researchers, because we want to be able to access clinical trial data, for example. We want to make sure that these data are fair, that they have a certain standard, that they are accessible. So this is all part of the secondary use of data. So the directorates involved on the European Commission side are DG Santé and DG Connect. And this also is reflected in the discussions on the national level, because we have now this proposal of the regulation available since May from the Commission. So also on the country side, it's mainly the health ministries dealing with the discussion about this data space. So this proposal, as I said, has been provided in May. Since then it's under discussion. So you find under this link then the full text. I add here a table of contents, which for some reason is not included in the document itself. So if you want to find things fast. So the main part, I think, which is interesting for us, is chapter 4, to facilitate the reuse of health data for research. And it comes with a certain number of actions or foreseen actions. And then, of course, interesting is also the estimated financial impact and the proposed way of implementing this data space. So the Commission has a preferred implementation option, which is not surprisingly, it's not the most expensive and it's not the cheapest one. So it's kind of in between. But we see that we look at something with an investment of around, let's say, 1 billion, 2 billion euros over the next 10 years. So it has the size of similar of the European Open Science Cloud, for example. So one can expect also the same amount of activity. So this means also that countries are expected to finally also invest heavily and to contribute heavily to this European health data space. So, and the goal is to a digital infrastructure which would support cross-border sharing and reuse of health data. So, of course, as I said, all this is under discussion with the countries right now. So there is a certain connection between EOSC and the European health data space. So we want to ensure that the regulation for the European health data space is coherent and develops synergetically with the EOSC initiative, because we don't want to double invest. We don't want to develop the same solutions. We want to make sure that what is developed also in terms of policies, in terms of reflections at the EOSC is also reused then in the case of this data space, and in general to raise awareness for the overarching role of EOSC as a transverse European data space. So the EOSC steering board agreed on some recommendations to slightly modify the text of the regulation. We have to see if this goes through, if this is accepted. So this is an input to interministerial discussions, and this is per country and then goes to the European Commission. So I don't have an overview how well this is going through in the different countries. I can say that in France, for example, this has been noted. If this is then enough to make it into the regulation, we will have to see. So what is the progress on this regulation? So this started under the French presidency. It's now under the Czech presidency, and we have the progress report on this regulation as beginning of December. I just would like to underline, so the Czech presidency did a great job in advancing this discussion and having this regular meetings of the Working Party on Public Health. And so mainly it was a focus on chapter 2 and 3, so the primary use of data. So it was a lot about patient rights, what should be considered there, how does this work in the different countries, what limitations this has in the legal sense. So on the remaining part, so on the secondary use of data, which is more interesting for us, there were some points raised. We are not done yet. So the council is invited to take note of the progress, and then this is going to be taken further through the next presidency. So there has been a conference in Prague on November 15, which we of course couldn't join because we were at the EOSC conference in Prague. But if you want to see the recording on this, it gives also a very good summary of what the European health data space wants to achieve and how it wants to achieve this. So there are some remaining issues. That's a very personal assessment. This is perhaps not a general statement. So we have this problem that cross-border sharing for clinical trials, for example, is very often directly between hospitals and not transverse national bodies and data hubs. But the idea of the European health data space is that the clinics, that the hospitals connect with with a national hub, and then this connects on the European level. Is this realistic? We have to see this, because different than in other domains, the ferrization of data is not very advanced. So there are different standards. The interoperability is a big issue. So one might have to push first for working on standards for this type of data before one says, okay, we have this stepwise implementation on the European level. So this, of course, is then in competition. If these steps take very long, Europe might be unattractive to be competitive in this domain, and we have to see thus how successful the European health data space can be. And of course, all this comes with extra costs, and the question is who's going to take over these costs. So all this is still to be discussed. So just to summarize, I think so far the discussion on the European health data space has had a strong focus on the primary use of data, on patient rights. Secondary use of data is often seen as a menace and as a risk, especially when it comes to the ministries of health, for example, rather than an opportunity. And the European data spaces need to be constructed in a coordinated way. So we should avoid that we now create 9 independent data spaces which don't hear from each other and which have never heard of the EOSC. And we should avoid duplication of effort and recognize EOSC as a transverse European data space. So this is a message to all of us. We have to continue to follow the evolution of regulation connected to this data space and to the others, and to identify where our intervention might be useful. Thank you very much.
Well, you hear the applause. Thank you, Volker. You put it right. And there are a lot of things that still are open, and there is a lot of challenge. And one of the challenge that I see is, of course, the duplication of effort and also the interoperability. But there are certainly more and more and more, because all data spaces have nearly the same, we'll say, challenges to deal with.
But we should also see the big opportunities here, because the research sector, what you can do there in the health domain, this is amazing. I mean, you could do so many things if data would be fair to start with, and then if we would have some infrastructure or coordination on European level, I think research could make immense progress here, and Europe could be really leading this.
Thank you, Volker, for this positive note also. Federico is in? Yeah, okay. Then,
yeah, I am.
Yeah, Paulo? Yeah, Paulo wants to pose you a question, Volker, so don't leave yet.
Volker, an organizational question. So how do you propose the data space at the level of the ministries? Because or better, the Ministry of Science in France is involved in this. And how many other ministries are involved, and who is coordinating this at domestic level? Just for us to understand, and if there are some lessons to be learned for the replication of it in other countries.
So this, in every country, this has been set up. So because the Commission is in contact with the countries and working towards a proposal for the Parliament, right? So this depends a bit on your country. In France, we have a General Secretary Office for European Affairs. They are coordinating this discussion. Then the discussion is led by the Health Ministry. There's a strong involvement of the Ministry of Economy. And further down the road, there's somewhere the Research Ministry. So we are rather not the main discussion point there.
Okay. Thank you, Volker. Just remain with us for the panel discussion. Now, I think that Federico is present, so if I may announce him again. So Federico Milani, Deputy Head of Unit of the Data Policies and Innovation at DG Connect. And this unit supports the data economy in the digital single market through policy initiatives. So Federico will tell us a bit more about the legislative framework, the Data Act, Data Governance Act, and maybe more. Federico, to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you said, my unit is responsible for the data strategy. So we are going to do we've done a number of initiatives, both legislative and policy-wise, and support also of the development of and the deployment of data spaces. So as you mentioned, we have drafted and we managed to get adopted the Data Governance Act, which is establishing specifically on data spaces, is establishing a new actor, which is the neutral data intermediaries, but is also promoting other actors like the altruism organization that can collect the data and make it easier to collect the data of citizens or companies that want to make accessible their data, for example, for research purposes. But let's focus on the data spaces, since EOS can sometimes also consider, and actually in the data strategy is being considered also one of the 10 data spaces that the Commission is going to support through initiative. So first of all, why we are talking about data spaces? We are talking about data spaces because what we want to create, what we want to move from the current situation where most of the data sharing is done on one-to-one, to a situation where we are also creating a federated data infrastructure where the data can be shared, can be discovered and shared between various companies and entities. In fact, when I'm presenting a data space, usually I'm showing a sort of this slide. So it's sort of creating a motorway, a route, a street network for accessing data. So we are going to involve all in many data spaces, all the players. So we are not focusing only on industries or research institute, but in all the various different players. And one major point that I want to stress, which sometimes it's not clear to everybody, is that the fact that a data space is created doesn't mean that all the participants in the data space will have immediate access to the data. They will be able to find the data that is available in the data space, but then to get access to the data, they will have to establish an agreement between the data providers so that the data providers still keep control on who has access to his data and for which purposes. This is why I'm saying that the data spaces are much more, they're not lakes, they're not data lakes where when someone has got the grant, is being granted the access to the data lake, then he can fish any data that he wants, but they're more like a fish market where you go into the fish market and then you negotiate with the seller of the fish the price, and you get only access to the data that you pay. I leave it the definition for you when you will going to get the slides. So which are the data space fundamentals? There is a data provider, there are data users, and there is a data intermediaries that usually manage all the common services and tools that are necessary to allow the sharing between the data provider and the data users. Usually the data intermediary doesn't have access to the data, but it's not given this fact. So the data intermediaries will have access, for example, to the metadata of the data that is going to be shared, because then he can provide the searching facility. He will have access, and he will be responsible, for example, for identify and authorize all the participants to the data space. So how do we see the evolution? Usually what we've seen already happening is that you start with a closed ecosystem where a group of participants, so data providers and data users, will get together with an organization that is both data provider or data users and data intermediaries, and will establish a network in order to share the data. Then usually the system is going to be open up. And in that case, the data intermediary usually should not have also a direct interest in accessing the data in order to become more neutral. And this is where comes the DGA, where we want to recognize these figures of this neutral data intermediary. And then what we expect is that these various open ecosystems could also join together in order to create what is the vision of the data strategy, so to create a single market for accessing data. Again, one point that many forget is that when we are talking about accessing, we are also including the concept of trading data. So there might be organization that wants to provide their data in exchange of money, so monetization of data, but also in exchange of services. I give you the data so that you can provide me additional services based on the data that you can have access, and then probably you as company can also develop services that can be provided also to other companies. Which are the design principles that for common European data spaces that you can find in a staff working document that the Commission has been published, which is a report to the Council on the status of the development of common European data spaces, where we describe all the various data spaces and all the initiatives that are that have been carried out by the Commission in order to promote the creation of data spaces. So first of all, we, in order to have the design principle, the design principle include tools to control, pool, access, use, and share all the types of data. But there is also a governance to be put in place. So a governance structure that should ensure fair, transparent, and proportionate, non-discriminatory access to sharing and use of data. And these two infrastructure, or to this part of the infrastructure, are necessary to create a data space. You cannot have one without the other if you want to have a data space. We also are looking for more than developing, sorry, we were also trying to get the creation of data space to be developed on international standards and on principles, existing principles, so that we avoid, for example, the silo effect, because some standards are only used for a specific sector, but also we want to avoid that companies will develop a system that then can be only used by a limited number of organizations, creating in a sort of sense a cartel. And this is what we really want to avoid. This is why we are talking about openness. We also encourage actors to use a common technical data infrastructure, so that, again, by using a technical data infrastructure that is common to different data spaces, we are going to assure a certain level of interoperability. It should be open to all actors. And this is another major aspect of a data space. So data space, all participants, the data space should be open to everybody, provided that, of course, they will respect the rules that have been set up by the governance structure that has been put in place. And of course, they should comply to all applicable EU legal framework. The first one that comes to everybody into mind is the GDPR, so respect of privacy. What are we doing? Well, we want to, first, we started to bring all the stakeholders together. So we work with the stakeholders, and with that one, we funded a number of coordination support action under the Digital Europe program in different data spaces, so that they can start to work together, create a network, but also define both the governance infrastructure and also the technical architecture to develop the data spaces. As I was mentioning, we have well, the Data Governance Act has been adopted, which the major idea is to increase trust in data sharing by creating this register of neutral data intermediaries, so that member states will be able to assess if a data intermediary is really neutral and doesn't have any interest or second interest in getting the data by the data provider and elaborate it and then sell it, sell the information without the data provider knowing what's happening with their data. We've got the Data Act, which is still at proposal stage, and it's being discussed in Council and Parliament, which wants to unlock the potential of industrial data and ensure fairness in the allocation of data value among the actors of the data economy. It's also aiming at facilitating interoperability between the data. We are going to offer a technical solution. What we are currently doing, the idea has been already developed, is to create and support the deployment, the development of a smart middleware software, which basically will offer the basic building blocks in order to create a data space. So, for example, as I was saying before, building blocks that will allow the identification and the authentication of the participants, searching tools and searching facilities, system that would allow the sharing of the data and the connection between the various participants. How are we going to do that? We are going to do that through funding, which not only will develop the smart middleware software, but also support the creation of common European data spaces, and through Horizon Europe by doing research on new technology for the development of common European data spaces, and of course, as for the electronic infrastructure, the support of the development of EOSC in the specific case. We have also part of the data governance acts, there is also the requirement by the member states to create a European Data Innovation Board, which has got the task of issuing guidelines to facilitate the development of common European data spaces. The guidelines will look in standards and interoperability requirements across sector data sharing that will be issued, and that we will ask the data spaces to take into account. So these are all the activities that we are going to do. And how are we going to do it? Basically, we are going mainly to use the Digital Europe program, and where we are going to have actions that are combining together. So we are going to have action at the technical level, the middleware solution, adding edge and cloud services, creating a marketplace for cloud services that can be used for the creation of data space. Then, as I was saying, in the first 2 years, we mainly focus on bringing together the stakeholders and identify the data structure needs for several data spaces, among which, for example, the Green Deal, the mobility, what else? The agriculture data space, and many others. And then in the near future, what we are going to start is a number of initiatives to build the data space. So support the creation of the first network or group of stakeholders that are going to build the data space. Which are the common data spaces that we are focusing on, but they are not the only one. This one or those one that has been mentioned in the data strategy. And you can see that there is EOSC there, but there is the health data space, the manufacturing, the finance, the mobility, the Green Deal, as I was mentioning, the energy, and the public administration. On the lower part, you see the various activities that we are doing in order to create a technical infrastructure for data processing and data spaces. And then, as I was mentioning, there is also the Data Space Support Center, which has got several roles, but basically it's coordinating the development of data spaces and assuring that common standards and interoperability are going to be used. Here is this slide, and here basically the main major thing is the link there of the Data Space Support Center that they just started in October, where the consortium is made by major stakeholders that are working that have been working years on the concept of data spaces. So we are very happy about the consortium and how they are working and getting all the various stakeholders and CSAs working together in order to really define which could be the common standards and the common architecture that can be developed. They will work and they support the work of the European Data Innovation Board by providing technical knowledge and technical know-how. And then one of the other activities that they will support the deployment of data spaces by answering to any specific questions that organization that wants to create or join a data space will have. And with this one, I think I've finished. Otherwise, it will take too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Federico. Applause. So the deployment of the technical deployment was the most interesting part that we have to skip because it's too long. That we take us too far away.
Well, it's just one slide, but I don't think that it's well, as I was saying, I was covering those elements just before.
No problem. I think already what you've put in your slides is a lot of information. And I already have the question here from the organization if they can receive those slides.
Sure.
Okay. Then Jan Wiebelitz will contact you for the slides. I think also that Paulo has a question. Okay.
Coming back to the slide number 10, the EOSC as a data space. Where would you put the EOSC in the slide number 10?
Yeah, it's there. Let me share again. And that one has been difficult to put it because let me share it. So for the moment, EOSC is, as you can see, it is one of the 10 data spaces. But going through discussion or whatever, you can see it like that, or like an horizontal data space which has got connection to all or many of all the various data spaces. So EOSC can be a data space that is made by it can be, let's say, the data space for research and probably also high education. And in that sense, it can share basically data, information, papers within the various the communities and the sector of higher education and research. However, what I would prefer to see it, at least in the longer run, is an horizontal data space with connection with all the various specific sectors so that it can get data, but also provide the latest research outcome and data for the various sectors. A clear example will be the link with the health, but also the energy, for example, or the Green Deal, where in the Green Deal, what we expect is not only to collect a huge amount of data about climate change or about climate, but also about the environment. So the pollution of the environment, air pollution, whatever, following the initiative that the DG Environment is carrying over. So it will be a great source of information for the research community. But then we would like also to have in the Green Deal, the outcome of the research of the research community, so that the Green Deal will be really a place where people will be able to find all this type of information. And this is valid for the other sector. In energy, for example, having all the latest result will open up development and innovative new products. And this is valid also for the other ones. So I'm not sure the slide is correct, but you can imagine that it's not easy to put both aspects in the slides.
Thank you, Federico. What I see that slide is always changing. So every month there's something that is happening with that slide. So maybe for the next time we can also speak about the cultural heritage data space and the media data spaces and all the others that not figuring on that slide. But of course we were talking about EOSC.
Yeah, well, as I was saying, if you are talking about, then you've got this slide, which is the data spaces funded in the digital program, where EOS does not appear because it's not funded through the Digital Europe program, and where you've got all the other data spaces that we are funding.
Thank you for showing that one. Okay, I guess that we want to continue with the language data space. That's one of those ones that is also on that slide. Okay, so that's in the digital program. So I will announce Francisca de Jong. Thank you, Federica, for your intervention. Now we will go over to the next speaker. Franziska will speak about the language data space. She's a full professor of e-research for humanities and also the executive director of Clarin e-IRG, the Common Language Resource and Technology Infrastructure. So I guess you're ready, Franziska?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Chris, for introducing me and for the invitation. It's a very interesting time period in which this workshop is taking place, because as clearly described in the previous talks, there's a lot of dynamics still. There are a lot of question marks, but there's also a lot of things emerging. And yes, indeed, I will also have this slide from digital in my presentation. So I'm happy to present to you the language data space, which is not something that I created, or I was not even involved in the creation of the concept. It was a concept created in the context of European policies. But Clarin is one of the envisaged parties to play a role in this thematic data space. So it is my pleasure to tell you whatever I know about what is going to take place in this process for the language data space. But in order to provide you with a bit of context, I first will say a little bit about Clarin e-IRG, and then I will dive into the details of the language data space and the role that Clarin plays in the establishing of it. So Clarin, in a nutshell, it's one of the research infrastructures. It's in Europe, it is a research infrastructure providing access to language resources, so data and tools, data in all kinds of languages and modalities. It's an S3 landmark. It's running on the efforts of a vibrant, committed community, has roots in multiple disciplines, so digital humanities, but language science and technology, which then, of course, also includes artificial intelligence. There are 22 member countries, 2 observers, and a linked third party. And the important thing to mention here, I think, is the fact that Clarin is built as a distributed network of more than 60 data centers, of which more than 20 are certified by an independent organization called Trust Seal. There's a strong focus on fairness of data and on interoperability of services. We have a discovery platform called the Virtual Language Observatory, and we are a member of EOSC. And there's more to say about it, but the thing that I would like to underline here is that dependent on what kind of definition and link with policy frameworks you take, Clarin could be seen as a data space, even as a language data space. Still, there is the need for more than what Clarin can offer. For Clarin, this is a happy development because we are ready for embarking on this more that is needed, namely making sure that the ambitions of the European policy program can be met even in even more detail. So you've had already a lot of information about Digital Europe, so I'm not going to dive into a lot of details, but this is the context for the definition of the language data space concept. Here you see the slide again. Things are ordered differently here, but indeed you see here cultural heritage and media included and language. The work on the language data space is supposed to serve the strategic objectives that are coupled to cloud data and AI. And the aim and driver there is to work on digital transformation of the public and private sectors. And as I said, Clarin is a mature data infrastructure, a data space, if you wish, for in principle research. But of course, like all other initiatives in research, we are also expected to have a socio-economic impact. So the emerging data spaces framework is a very interesting venue for us to make that ambition concrete. So here you see the text from the European Commission documents about what this language database space should bring. a platform and a marketplace where the request for language resources and services will match the offer. So there is in part the offer by Clarin. There are other initiatives working on language resources that also have an offer. And now with this European language data space, we together jointly will be able to do something more for matching the offer with requests that exist in other communities than the ones that we've been focusing on first of all. So there are many more stakeholders that the Commission would like us to work with to create the opportunity to monetize efforts in terms of the creation of language resources, and also work on a wider deployment as part of the single marketplace. This is another slide that was created within the European Commission. So it's underlining that the language data space is a thematic data space. Also that it is building on existing service offer for research, public sector and industry, with a lot of attention for the multimodality, the complexity of AI-based language services. Just last week, we were all informed about how fast these developments go with this conversation tool that was made available by OpenAI. This multimodal language data space should focus on collection, creation, sharing, and reuse, which is, of course, also the goal of Clarin as a research infrastructure in this realm. There are a lot of functions for the language data space. Too much to go into more detail. It has to do with modeling of data for certain application domains. It's about data analytics and sentiment analysis. It's about support for multilinguality, all aimed at furthering the digital transformation, the economic recovery, and the technological autonomy. In this top bar, you see a lot of applications, and here you see the sectors that may make use of these functionalities. They exist. They have been developed both within research and the public sector, and the data space may be a way to bring them together for all the audiences rather than for sectoral or thematic audiences. In terms of budget, you see here the multi-annual financial budget for this type of activities, and here you see that for the language data space, for the short run, there is €6 million available, but you also see on this slide that after the first term, there will be room for other types of funding related to procurement and grants for SMEs. So how will this language data space come about? And maybe, as you see from this slide, for this type of action, a call for tender was issued last year, and the results are now informally available. And the idea is that very early in 2023, the language data space will be launched. It will be a continuation of the activities of a number of organizations working on language resources for the public sector called e-IRG. They will do the coordination, but many more organizations with a stake in language technology and language data, such as Clarin ERIC, play a role in the implementation. So how will this come about? Well, first of all, there will be an institutional center of excellence for language technologies that will be established to make sure that the existing initiatives can collaborate. It will be called CELT. And of course, an important aspect is the governance layer as a framework for the activities, including the managing of the legal aspects that will be needed. And then in the deployment of the language data space, again, there will be a reuse of existing technology, such as the platforms for the exchange of distributed data, the European Language Grid, the e-translation already mentioned, and the Clarin VLO will play a dominant role in the building of that platform. It's important to underline that here too, there will be a model based on a distributed network of data centers that will together create the offer for this wide range of potential communities that can make use of these data and works towards one of the goals, monetizing the previous efforts. So that will lead to an operational layer. And then this slide is describing the rich diversity in the envisaged stakeholders landscape. So it's industry, media, research institutes, cultural associations, and public administration. Existing AI on-demand platforms will be coupled to it. There will be links to other data spaces, because in many cases, as also underlined by Federico Milani, you do want the data spaces to not be just in their thematic bubble, but to also ensure interoperability with other data spaces. So, for example, the Clarin data offer is currently being explored for collaboration with health data, and there are other plans for collaboration with environmental data. You see here also types of functionalities coupled to the kind of people working in these sectors. The details are maybe less interesting, but it's very important if you have such a how to say that, diverse landscape, that the governance is well arranged. So what will Clarin contribute to this language data space? The technology will that is behind Clarin's current discovery platform, based on the harvesting of metadata, will be reused in the context of the language data space. The models and the expertise for the creation and harvesting of metadata for distributed multilingual and multimodal language resources will be made available where needed. There is expertise with a range of licensing models. There is the link with EOSC. Clarin is a member of EOSC, so the interoperability framework emerging there will also be available wherever it is useful for this language data space. And there is a lot of experience with the design and implementation of a governance model for multi-country collaboration. And this is a reference to the model of EDIC, which is sort of inspired by the model of ERIC that we know very well. So our expertise here will again be put to use. I think I will stop here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Francisco, thank you very much.
Francisca, there is one question in the chat that came from Elena Simple. Could you please address this question? Can you read it, or should I read it?
I'm reading it now. The relationship between the investment in the European context and other developments and foundational models for the basis of the functionalities that the language data space is supposed to offer. Yeah, of course, this is one of the things that we would like to see maturing, this relationship. Of course, what it will require is that the APIs for the various services are suited for this interaction. And I think we are ready for that, because the VLO has undergone several transitions, and currently we have a flexible API framework. So if there is a specific need to adjust our interface or the user interface, that's definitely possible. I think the most problematic part, or the most exciting part, is maybe a better word to use here, is the licensing issues. And that's on the agenda. So I hope this answers your question.
Yes, thank you. So I'm not a specialist in this field. It's just that I was like everyone, trying these sort of models recently, and we're not sure what data they're using to be trained on. So
yeah, well, of course, these models, even though they are already I'm not saying excellent, but amazingly, it's amazing functionality, of course, and the boundaries of for which you can put to use is of course something that we all will have to explore. But they base their models on commercial data resources, but for very specific languages and very specific, because this is now running for English mainly, and all the other languages have access to. For all the other languages, there's less data available, but in the data space, we have always been working on multilinguality, so we can play a role there to diversify the offer of these services.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca. I think about language data spaces, we can organize one full day again. It's rather new, it's moving, it's a big hype, and it's pulling also the resources, existing resources, which makes that the language data space can start really fast. So we will move immediately to Elena Simpler. She is Professor of Computer Science at the King's College London, and Elena's research is at the intersection between knowledge graphs and social computing. And she will tell us a bit more about a study that she did about for Data Europe, about the challenges and opportunities of data spaces. So, Elena, give you the floor.
1 second. Let me just share the correct slides. Say. Apologies for this. We will get there in the end. Right, so now you should see the screen like this, and now you should see the screen in presentation mode.
Okay.
Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to start by saying that this is work that was done with colleagues at the Polytechnic University in Madrid, the group led by Professor Oscar Corcho, who's also very active in the EOSC space. Myself, I've been working in open data, particularly open government data, for a long time. My connections to data sharing, I suppose, are strongest if I think back about the project, a Horizon 2020 project I coordinated a few years ago called Data Pitch. So this was one of the first projects, I believe, where we, before anyone was talking about data spaces, we were exploring the socio-technical, legal, organizational barriers when it comes to sharing data between different organizations. And we were basically pairing startups and small and medium businesses with data holders in the private and public sectors. But today I'm going to talk about some work that we did in the context of Data Europa.eu. And please allow me to start by giving you just a brief introduction of Data Europa.eu, so that you perhaps understand better the connections between these two developments. And then I'm going to also give you a short summary of the work into the link between Data.Europa.eu and European Common Data Spaces. So Data.Europa.eu, those of you who don't know it, is possibly the one of the most important investments in public sector information in the world. I've been involved with this project as an advisor, as a consultant since 2014. And it's basically doing two things. On the one side, it acts as the channel to publish open government data from the European Commission, But at the same time, it also offers a one-point entry to more than 1.5 million government data sets available openly in the government licenses across 176 catalogs. And some of these catalogs are the national catalogs of the EU member states, but there's also a whole range of regional and organizational catalogs that publish open data resources that are integrated on this portal. And the idea would be that the portal, through the functionality that it provides, would facilitate access to open government data. This is a very complex slide that I won't have time to do justice, but essentially what it says is that we have open data sets that are available online at different sites, in different languages, in different countries, different domains, that are harmonized into this data.europa.eu architecture. There's an effort to align and integrate and curate the metadata, which is essential, as you know, for data discovery. And providing a whole range of analysis on top of this index, alongside a number of non-data resources that support data reuse. With 1.5 million data sets index, it's very important to allow people to search through this, and we offer a number of faceted search and keyword search functionalities. Like here, if you look for primary school education, for a publisher like EOSC. And then, so if you go and want to use a data set, like here is a primary education data set published by the Irish government, you see we're very transparent in terms of the type of metadata that we collect and curate, and where it comes from, to allow users to use this data with confidence. And there's also a number of this so-called distributions for the data sets, for which we are also offering previews, like you see here at the bottom of the right-hand side, to allow someone, before downloading a data set and investing lots of time in it, to try to understand whether that's the data that they need. Besides search, we have the critical mass to provide a whole range of interesting analysis around how fair, so findable, accessible, interoperable, usable this data ecosystem is. And we then monitor also statistics of open government data publication over time and across themes and origin and catalog. And as you can see here on the left-hand side, there's a range of domains that are already supported in the portal. So I mentioned that besides the actual data resources and the metadata documenting them, there are other training and other resources to support the creation of an open government ecosystem, to raise people's awareness about what open data is and how it could be used for a range of audiences. So we provide strategic analysis like country insights, the open data impact report, open data maturity report, and a whole range of use cases. So use cases are potentially interesting, not just because we have one of the richest collection, I would say, of use cases in open government data in the world, so more than 900, but also because of the work that has been done by other people in the project around the so-called use case observatory, where 30 of these open data reuse use cases have been monitored for a 3 years period to get a better understanding of the sort of implications that opening up and sharing data could have. And I'm mentioning opening and sharing data at the same time because experience shows that an organization that that is sharing the data across business units. So it starts by putting those technologies and processes in place to be able to share data between one business unit to the other, will also be more likely to open up relevant data sets if they're not commercially sensitive, or if it makes sense from a business point of view, but also sharing businesses with other partners. So looking at these sort of use cases and how they evolve can also give important pointers, in our opinion, around potential areas of impact, as well as challenges and opportunities for data that will never make it in the public domain, but will be shared in a trusted environment. Open data maturity is analysis that's been going on since 2015 in data.europa.eu. So there's 4 areas: policy, impact, portal, and quality, and it's based on a survey methodology with the representatives of the National Open Data Initiative. And I'd encourage you to check in with us in a few weeks when the 2022 Open Data Maturity Report will be released. So this is just a very brief introduction into this huge project that has harmonized the open government data space and been leading, world leading in many ways in terms of the technologies and processes it put in place. So as we keep up with what happens elsewhere in the European data ecosystem, we wanted to understand what is the relationship between what is happening in data.europa.eu to continue to support publishers in releasing their open data sets and updating them and curating them, and what happens in Europe regarding data spaces. So this is yet another list. We've seen many of these versions today in the presentations. So this is the initial list of common European data spaces that we have based this analysis on. And the premise of the analysis has been that just like research data that is shared via infrastructures and services provided by EOSC, so data.europa.eu and open government data more broadly could and perhaps should be a core supplier of public sector data for every European common data space, not just the ones specifically related to public administration. And I've added here as well on the right-hand side the number of data sets by theme that we are indexing. Those of you who were looking at the numbers will notice that here we list just 1.2 million data sets rather than 1.5 that we had at the beginning. And that's because, like with every metadata record, there are metadata is never complete. But the point here is that we have a number of data sets from many domains that are relevant to the list that I have just presented. The second premise of the work has been that, as we have heard in the presentations earlier, there is a lot of funding and instruments and initiatives that are running at the moment or are being organized, not at the least the support center for data spaces, which will be working towards deploying data space infrastructure and realizing data spaces in various verticals. And as part of this, there are efforts to generate lists of data sets that are relevant for each data space, alongside the models to govern the spaces. And myself as an academic working in the space, but also as part of the data.europa.eu team, believe that public administrations and other open data holders and publishers must be part of this conversation from the beginning. So what we have done, and this is, I should say, research that we have done at the beginning of this year. So things are evolving rapidly, as you could see from the presentation. So we've done the research in January, February 2022, and it's part of an ongoing line of work that we are doing. So in this report, we wanted to explore challenges and opportunities for data.europa.eu in the context of data spaces and do landscaping and initial analysis. And there will be a follow-up piece once some of these data spaces become more available, to think more robustly about how data.europa.eu could act as an intermediary in existing spaces. For the present report, we've done a mix of desk research and interviews with relevant stakeholders. For the data research, we looked at 2 key initiatives in the space. The International Data Space Association, they publish a radar with use cases, 57 use cases at the time we did the research. And we did then the same for Gaia-X. They had 78 use cases in different verticals and a number of position papers for specific verticals. And then we looked at the project. At the time, the Data Spaces Support Center started in September, I believe. So after we've done the research. In the Open Day CSA, there were 34 projects that were surveyed in 4 different domains. And what did we do? So we looked at these resources and we wanted to see whether open data is a concern at all from any source, any portal, and then try to understand how those initiatives that are very prominent in the data space world engage actively or otherwise with key open government data stakeholders, like public sector publishers and data intermediaries. We've also run 12 interviews with data owners, software providers, vocabulary providers, data identity providers in this space. So as a result, from the 151 initiatives that we have surveyed, only a small share use open data. 2 specifically mention data.europa.eu, and 19 again, a small share involve public sector stakeholders in their conversations, and you can see the breakdown across the domains of that initial list of data spaces here. There seem to be overlapping priorities in data space development as well in terms of domains based on our analysis and comparison from IDS, Gaia-X, and Open Day. At least in the use cases that we have surveyed, not all countries are equally represented. And we also noticed biases in terms of data sources, stakeholders through developments underway to change that. And 3 sectors, geo-mobility and smart cities, have clear ties to open data sources, but no portals or otherwise big initiatives in the open data space in this are mentioned there. And then there's a number of sector-specific findings you can read in the report, which I will skip now. From an interview point of view, I'm going to wrap up in a second. Public sector organizations are underrepresented in ongoing data sharing initiatives. There's no catalogs of data sets that are yet to be covered in the spaces. And we've also, interviewees also pointed it out that metadata schemes and identifier schemes, vocabularies, things that EOSC and the Open Government Data Movement have thought long and hard about, are currently underspecified. And I will leave you with the conclusion. So current initiatives do not consider some spaces that are relevant to public sector, like procurement and skills. Now there's work underway for cultural heritage and Green Deal. We believe that open government data is a core type of data source, but that sort of engagement with public sector stakeholders and open data intermediaries need to happen more and need to happen now, because there's also experiences, just like for EOSC, in developing the technologies and in the sort of socio-technical challenges that data spaces for sure will need to master in order not to miss opportunities. So we will publish a second report next year, hopefully working together with some ongoing deployments in data spaces. And I leave you with the link to the report if you're interested. It's also linked from data.europa.eu, and you can find it online. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Very impressive. Tried to read your complete report and didn't even know that much data spaces exist. I don't even know where you got all the information by ADS, Gaia-X, and all that kind. It's really impressive. Also, the conclusions are really interesting. Thank you for your presentation.
No problem.
I don't know if there are immediate questions because I don't have access to the chat. But if not, I think we still have 30 minutes for a panel discussion. So we come back to you, Elena, also. But I want to invite all the panelists to the virtual screen so that we see all faces. And so we will see also new faces appearing, which I will present. We don't see everybody on the screen, but I suppose that everybody is. We lost Elena or not? Elena, you're still there? Federico?
Yes.
Federico? We lost Federico. Okay, then we will go on with the panel. We still have 30 minutes. Just the new faces on the screen. Ingrid Dilo. Ingrid Dilo is the Deputy Director at Data Archiving and Networking Services, that's DANS in Netherlands. She is the co-chair of the Research Data Alliance, and she is here also in a role as a person who is dealing with fair data in some Eurozone 2020 project and Eurozone Europe project as Fair is Fair and Fair Impact. She has also a role with fair data in the EOSC. And we also have Ignacio Blanquer. He's professor of the Computer Systems Department at Valencia Political University, coordinator of the Spanish network of e-sciences, member of the e-IRG, and also member of the EOSC Association board. So we are here all together to have some questions on what we just heard. And so I think this was a very interesting session and all people are very knowledgeable on that topic. So just to begin one of the first questions with somebody who wasn't here with a presentation, Ingrid, can I start with you? You have some experience in the EOSC. You have some experience also with fair data. But when you hear all those presentations and what also you hear, I have as background, what do you think? What could bring the EOSC as an experience and expertise to all those emergent data spaces? I think EOSC was mentioned a lot of times, but we didn't see really EOSC on the plate. So what are you inputs?
Thank you very much for that question, Chris, and hello, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank all the speakers because I think that they gave very interesting talks, and I must say that I personally learned a lot this morning, so it was very valuable for me. I think already several speakers said that EOSC is one of the data spaces. You can see it as a horizontal one, you can see it as a vertical one. And within the EOSC, we often use the definition that EOSC should be a web of fair research data and services. And of course, this vision came about already quite some years ago. I think it was 2016. And of course, since then, already for years, a lot of human effort and public funding has gone into the implementation of this vision. And I think it's safe to say that so far, the journey certainly has not been easy. EOSC is a complex beast, and we have seen along the way also quite a lot of trial and error. And I think it's very important that the experiences that we have from this journey would be taken into account with respect to the new data spaces to learn from, and in order not to make the same mistakes and not to reinvent wheels where EOSC already has been successful. So in the European Open Science Cloud, a lot of emphasis is put on the implementation of those famous FAIR principles because they, in essence, facilitate interoperability and data sharing and data reuse eventually. And because of that emphasis, already a lot of EU-funded projects have been working on these elements to come up with practical solutions to implement those FAIR principles, both in more generic projects as well as in projects that have a very domain-specific focus. Now, one of these projects was the generic FAIR project that ran for 3 years until early this year. And that project, for example, produced multiple tools, methods, guidelines, recommendations, and also software to implement FAIR for different stakeholder groups. And that work is currently being continued in another project called FAIR Impact that took off in the summer of this year. And that project is really focused again on implementing FAIR enabling practices. We look at tools, services, and we try to do that across scientific disciplines, but also across research outputs. So not only looking at data, but also looking at, for example, semantic artifacts, software, etc. And we do that at different levels, European, national, and also institutional. In this project, for example, we focus specifically on persistent identifiers, like I said, semantic artifacts, mappings, crosswalks, but we also look at metrics and certification for FAIR and at interoperability in general, because all of these elements, of course, ultimately facilitate interoperability. Now, this project is a coordination and support action, which means that we also provide different financial as well as in-kind support mechanisms for different stakeholders to implement FAIR solutions. And in this project, we also have specific resource to work together with the emerging data spaces. And personally, listening and also following the developments, I think that this new data space support center could be crucial there, could be a very important instrument and a starting point for us on the research side to see what the best practical approach would be to make sure that the experience that we have, especially in the area of FAIR, implementing FAIR, how we can share that with the upcoming data spaces. Another element that I detected in the slide with the design principles that Chris and I think also others showed earlier is that element of building on international standards. Of course, there is FAIR, but there is more. And I think it would also be good for the data spaces to look at work that has already been done in the international organizations in the research area, like the Research Data Alliance. There, many experts around the world in the area of data have been working for many years to come up with standards, recommendations, a shared vision on all kinds of solutions that help data interoperability. The organization celebrates its 10th anniversary next year, and because of that, we'll have monthly themes, and that I think is an excellent opportunity also for the data spaces to interact with this side of the world. Another example could be Core Trust Seal for community-based repository certification that was mentioned already by Francisca in her description of Clarin. Another international community-based standards that, to my mind, also touches upon a very important topic if we want to keep data in the data spaces fair over time, because we need to make sure that they live in an environment that is trustworthy and fair enabling, and that can not only guarantee the accessibility, but also the accessibility. So that means that we need to do active preservation. So again, a plea to make use of the wheels that we have already invented to save time and money. But of course, I think the big challenge will be, and that's always a big challenge, how do we create the necessary connections? Because it's very easy to stay in all our little silos. And this is, to my mind, essentially people's work. So how do the people that need to connect find one another? And we already see in the context of EOSC that is difficult with, for example, in EOSC around 30 or 40 projects contributing at the same time to the creation of that beast. Even these projects very often don't know what they're doing in their little corners. So how do we expand that world even to the data spaces? So I hope that this new EOSC can play a role there. But at least for me, this session provided a couple of good points of contact to start making these connections from my side. So I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Ingrid, thank you very much for your intervention. What I take with me about the EOSC is that within the EOSC, there's already a lot of things that is done. There is a lot of expertise. We are dealing with a lot of things that I will say will be the same endeavor also in the data spaces about interoperability, about semantics, but EOSC and the research community already had done a lot of work that can influence all the work of the data spaces, and we need to address the DCCS then and to talk with that we have also things that can influence them also for the other data spaces. But no, we were talking a lot about the EOSC Association, and we have also Ignacio with us. He is member of the association board. I'm sure that there have already been a lot of discussions about data spaces within the board. Or this is confidential, or you can tell us something about those discussions.
Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to all the speakers for the very interesting presentations. Indeed, we see that the digital is something closely. That there are very much opportunities for cooperation. We don't have a clear statement, official statement to since many of these activities are on the way now. We follow it closely. What I can say. We see as an horizontal layer, as I mentioned in the chat. We could provide, that's also Ingrid, this view of the compliance with the FAIR principle of the data under this consideration, as well as the services for this purpose. And we also contribute with data and contribute with users. We represent a large of users that are intensively working on data, and therefore I think that the EOSC has a major role in both consumer as well as the cross-domain, which is some of the principles that we clearly want to address. With respect to the a lot of commonalities between work that is being done on the provisioning of services, for example, simple middle procurement, the work in e-IRG, in which we have strong, I would say, intense discussions with e-IRG in the beginning, trying to understand the commonalities common for that. And we identify not only us, but also reported this study from Deloitte. There are many development on the EOSC side have been identified as interesting. Clearly, there will be a lot of questions. It's very important that we address the EOSC procurement, the EOSC, the simple, in a way, ensure the compatibility, the interoperability, and avoid reinventing what has been with success in the EOSC community, right? So what I will say is that what I want, just conclude, is that there are a lot of efforts that are common with the developments already done and in the EOS strategic agenda. We have to make the maximum effort to coordinate with those activities.
Okay, thank you, Ignacio. That shed a bit more light on the internal structures of the EOSC Association, but if you are going a bit higher, Volker, I don't know if you're still there. Yeah, okay, Volker. In your role as a EOSC steering board member, that's another part of the governance. You're dealing also with the data spaces. So how can we avoid duplication of effort in the process of setting up the European data spaces? And you can see it with your head of the EOSC steering board.
Yeah, that's a communication issue, right? We have there, because even the steering board members, they don't see all the different developments in their countries, right? As we saw, there are different ministries involved. It's the same for the research communities. Each research community has a certain horizon where they look at. So I think that's really something where we have to indeed get organizations like the steering board or the board of directors of the association or the commission. We are always looking for DG Connect, for example, to help us there to make the connections. So far, I must say, with limited success, right? We are not in direct discussion with these different developments. It's also a question of time, right? How much you can invest. So I think we cannot create a big board or forum where we have all these discussions together. I think it's a message for each one of us, for example, the steering board members, to go home and to investigate in their ministries how this is seen, who is involved there, and then make the connections there. The same has to be happening at DG Connect. We have to get some feedback there from the colleagues at DG Connect, how they see, how they want to connect the different entities. If I see the European, how's it called, Data Spaces Support Center, I see, and so I heard about this only recently. So we didn't hear about this at the steering board. So there's definitely a communication problem. But I would like to put the burden to do these connections at the higher level. So steering board, board of directors of the association, etc., and DG Connect, because the research communities, the organizations, they cannot look into that. So they should be then informed where are the connection points they should look into. It's really on our shoulders, I think, to do that and to investigate where we have to be involved. And at the same time, of course, we have to be aware of all the data spaces, but not every data space perhaps is so relevant for our research communities. And perhaps we have to select where we get engaged and how much human power we put into this.
Thank you, Volker. An important remark is, of course, that in EOSC and also here in the e-IRG, we are dealing with research, and that's not the data space. So data spaces are going further than only research. It can be used, but we can provide research data, but that's, I will say, it's not all the open data. Even open data is limited. So Elena, just come to you. We're speaking about a lot of data. It's not all open data. So there are a lot of brokers, intermediaries also in this game. So how do you see Open Data Europe or even the EOSC as an intermediate for open data?
Thank you for the question. I think there's a number of ways to answer it. I think there's, as speakers have said on this panel and earlier in the talks, I think there is a question of expertise and exchanging best practices and technologies. So in the analysis that we have done, and that's perhaps different now because the ecosystem is evolving so quickly, but questions around how would the data sets within a data space be described? How would one search for these data sets? How would a potential user or buyer of these data sets find the resources that they need and decide whether to purchase them or not, are relevant in a closed environment, just like they are relevant in an open data ecosystem. The challenges are different, but there's many commonalities as well. So in open government data, we're speaking about data in potentially any domain that is published by a whole range of stakeholders. So you have huge heterogeneity at technical organizational level. You have huge variations in the quality of the data that is published, in the technology capabilities of the teams who are putting the data online. That forced us at dataeuropa.eu to develop robust, scalable technology to find data online and be able to cope with this heterogeneity and analyze it and provide feedback to publishers on how they could improve their data so that others could use it. These technologies and the experiences we have made are transferable to closed or shared environments, where on top of these challenges, you will also have questions around access and trusted access to sensitive resources. But if we're talking about trading data, you will have commercial contracts, you'll have a whole range of agreements in place. So questions around being able to decide whether to use or to pay for a data set or a sample of this data or not. Questions around being able to find the best data set that serves your project needs have a new dimension. Say, we've also heard earlier about federated data spaces, which I think would be quite, I mean, it's a must. In my opinion, if we want to have a data market, there are opportunities and reasons why these data spaces have this very strong vertical focus, and I personally think that's the right way to do it, to bootstrap them. But in my experience working with data businesses in the last 10 years, they don't need one data set from a certain domain or 10 data sets from the same domain. They often need a range of data sets from different data spaces. So then the same questions around federations that the data spaces will have to answer are questions that data.europa.eu and possibly EOSC as well have answered in the last decades, because we are harvesting and working with data and integrating data from more than 20 or so categories, and as these use cases that I was mentioning earlier show, we are able to support data consumers in using data from different domains productively. And so I agree with what I said earlier about having these conversations. I think for the Data Space Support Center, Capgemini, who are leading on the delivery of data.europa.eu, are also part of that consortium. So we hope things will, that conversation and those ties, at least for open government data, will intensify over the next years. But I think more broadly, I think we're here people who believe in an open approach, who believe in open technologies. And there is a role to play for these sort of technologies, even in an ecosystem where you want to establish business models, and you want perhaps to establish those business models around data trading.
Elena, thank you very much for this this reflection. A general question for Francisca. Francisca, you're already a long time the executive director of Clarin. So at the moment, you didn't even know that you were not suddenly involved in a data space. Within, I think the last months, it's going very fast now with the data language space, and you will be a front runner even. Without that, you didn't even know. So what is, in your opinion, as a front runner, as I will say, even a candidate ethic for the language data space, what are the next actions that you think that have to be done to make it operational, a real data space? What is, in your opinion, now the next step? Is it about governments? Is it about the interoperability? Is it about pooling the resources?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to have an answer that is based on what I know about the language data resources and the various initiatives. In general, I think a risk is that given the fact that there is unclear governance models at the moment, even though there is discussion about new models such as the e-IRG, it will be important to have an organization that can steer, that can identify relevant initiatives that should be in touch with each other rather than and collaborate rather than be in competition. And sometimes the various funding schemes within Europe put parties in competition rather than in a mode of collaboration, which is a bit of a waste of effort and energy, and could also lead to reinventing wheels. So I think good orchestration also between the various units within the European Commission, both DG Connect and DG RTD, would be very, very important to be able to proceed in a clear way, especially for the language data space. It wasn't always clear when this call would be issued. Of course, Clarion was mentioned in the program text, so it was clear that including also ELG and EORC. So it was clear that the key players were known by the ones who wrote the text. But then in the way the call for the support is set up is not always crystal clear about the fact that we all have overlapping objectives, and that we should work in complementarity rather than in competition. So that is, I think, in general, an important thing to be set up. Given the fact that there is this model of federation of access to data for the language data space, I could easily imagine that in practical terms things would work out smoothly. In terms of governance, it's still unclear, because the ERIC, in a way, the model of ERIC is in a way suited for taking up the link with industry. Now there will probably be a new legal entity, EDIC, and it's hard to tell whether that collaboration will go smoothly, because it will be dependent on decisions from individual countries to also join this new model. I would have rather seen one model for the data spaces, both for those who focus on research as their primary mission, and the ones that are primarily focusing on collaboration with industry. I don't think it's it might cause confusion in the field to have several legal entity types that are based on similar principles. Okay. But maybe this will work out smoothly. I don't know. It's a question mark.
Thank you, Francesca. It merits more discussions, but I think time is nearly over. Maybe there are still other questions. If not, Paolo will continue.
Thank you, Chris. I would like to conclude by asking the panelists for a last comment, a last remark. And therefore, I also prepared one question to you. So the last 6 weeks or 7 weeks, we experienced, just to mention some of them, the foundation of the Fair Digital Object Forum, then the General Assembly of the EOSC, then the EOSC Symposium, then we had the General Assembly, for example, of Clarion, which is a cosmos. Then we had now the e-IRG workshops. Tomorrow we will have the delegates meeting of the e-IRG. Then we had the S3 meetings, we had the ICRI, and so on. Just to mention some of them. My question to you is, how can we develop these common visions? How can we do this? And how can we organize a monitoring of these developments? So do you have now on the fly some recommendations, for example, to the ministries at local level, not at the European level, but what could the ministries at the domestic level learn from this? I mean, ministries, not ministry, but there are more than one ministry which is involved. So the question is, what kind of recommendations can we now produce as a takeaway of this session? And the question is to all of you as a panelist. Please take the floor. Volker.
I mean, on the national level, the mechanisms are in place, right? You have interministerial groups, committees, and so on. The question is then if you have the right experts in these groups. So there is not a straightforward answer, because I mean, you have only a limited number of colleagues working in this the various ministries, and collaboration between ministries can be sometimes a bit difficult. So I think what I could see is that for e-IRG there's a clear role to provide clear recommendations. For example, if e-IRG would say, well, this and this data spaces, they are very relevant for what we are doing, please do this and this on national level to ensure that the collaboration works fine. I think that would be a great way to make use of e-IRG as a think tank and as a body which can give recommendations.
Thanks, Volker. Franziska.
Yeah, thanks. I think it would be important for, in the context of the discussion about data spaces, to recognize that lots of these developments are based on things that are in existence already and coming from European collaboration. The research infrastructure, pan-European research infrastructures are one example, but all these things have been made possible by huge investments from the countries. They pay membership fees, but on top of that, they have their in-kind contribution to these international models. And sometimes when they focus on the collaboration or the investment in national infrastructure, they are not always aware of the huge investments that have been made previously in the European initiatives that they have that they can be credited for. So I would, as a recommendation that e-IRG could include in whatever report, is to always keep an eye on the potential value and the value proposition of these European initiatives, because not always this is widely known within the local ministries.
Thank you, Franziska. Ignacio.
Yes, thank you, Paulo. And in the same direction that Volker mentioned, just to stress a bit more, I mean, it is not only that the ministries have the experts, but also the competences are so strict, divided in the country that politically it's difficult to collaborate. For example, in Spain, artificial intelligence is a competence of the Ministry of Economics, and digital twins on the Ministry of Science. And they don't realize that, I mean, both things are heavily interlinked until you discuss with them, and they feel a little. I mean, they fear to step on the other's foot for I mean, mixing the terms. So having clear recommendation at the European level, e-IRG could play a role there in identifying which are the areas that should be addressed together, or they have commonalities will help to have. I mean, the support to go to those ministries and say, look, we have to work together. It's not just to split the competencies. There's an important work to be done in cooperation here.
Many thanks, Ignacio. Ingrid.
Yeah, I think I very much agree with the usefulness of recommendations from organizations like e-IRG for national ministries. Having worked in such a ministry for 10 years,